Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. It's so wonderful to see these many people joining us today for the launch of AUT and HERTSA National Webinar Series. For those who are maybe less familiar with either of the organization, you may know AUT already. AUT recognizes and celebrates the outstanding teaching and leadership in higher education across Australia, whereas HERTSA is a professional association dedicated to advancing higher education through research, scholarship, and practice. Today, together, we are pleased to celebrate and create this space for shared learning and national conversation. So our first session today is going to be on Indigenous knowledge in action, transforming higher education from the ground up. We are bringing together this exceptional panel to explore how Indigenous knowledge can shape teaching, curriculum, and institutional practice. As this is our very first session, I'm also very pleased to see these many people, but also Professor Angela Carbon, the AUT director. She will be offering some opening remark and formally welcome you all. Over to you, Angela.
Thank you so much, Manisha, and thank you, HERTSA, for partnering with us on this really important series. As Manisha said, I'm Professor Angela Carboni, the Director of the Australian Awards for University Teaching, and I'm here with my Senior Manager, Angeline Sims. So, Angeline, if you'd like to, who's been instrumental in getting this, and I can just see Christy's just waved her hand, so lovely to see you, Christy. This series started off with a conversation probably about a year ago, and it's great to see it actually eventuate. So on behalf of the Australian Awards for University Teaching team, I'd like to warmly welcome you to the first AAUT and HERTSA national webinar, as Manisha mentioned, on Indigenous knowledges in action, transforming higher education from the ground up. I'd like to start with an acknowledgement of country. So on behalf of everyone joining us today, I acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we meet. Wherever you are across Australia and beyond, I pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and I extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people with us today. I also acknowledge the deep and ongoing contribution of Indigenous knowledges to education, research, and community life, and the responsibilities we share in ensuring those knowledges are honoured, not just referenced. So this is the first webinar in the new national series hosted by AAUT and HERTSA. And the aim of this is to really highlight some of the work, the really important work of the Australian Awards for University Teaching recipients, and to start to foster a national conversation about how we can meaningfully embed Indigenous knowledges in our teaching, in curriculum and institutional practice. And it's great to see so many people connected. So we have a really inspiring panel today. These panels are award-winning educators, and their work is grounded in Indigenous ways of knowing, being and doing. And they're actively reshaping higher education from within their institutions. So I'd really like to introduce our panel. So if the panel members, make sure you've got your cameras on and if you'd like to wave. So delighted to introduce our panel chair, Professor Corrine Sullivan from Western Sydney University. She's a Wurundjeri scholar and a 2017 AAUT citation recipient. Corrine is an Associate Dean Indigenous at Western Sydney University. Her research explores how Indigenous people negotiate identity through place-based and spatial dynamics. Grounded in Indigenous ways of knowing, her work prioritises relational accountability and community-led approaches that challenge imposed systems and support transformative futures. She is a multi-award-winning researcher and currently leads 2 ARC Discovery Grants and 1 ARC Linkage Grant. Great to have you here chairing the session, Corrine. I'd also like to introduce our 3 panellists. So the first one is Associate Professor Jessica Russ-Smith. So Jessica, if you make sure you can put your camera on and wave. Jessica is from the Australian Catholic University. She has receipt of the 2024 Neville Bonner Award for Indigenous Education. She received a citation, and Jessica is a sovereign Wurundjeri Wambool woman, Associate Professor of Social Work, Assistant Deputy Head of School Allied Health, and Chair of ACU's Indigenous Research Ethics Advisory Panel, a national leader in decolonising higher education and social work. Her research spans Indigenous sovereignty, critical disability justice, ethics, and artificial intelligence. Great to have you here, Jessica. Our second panelist is Kat Kute. So, Kat, if you could also like to put your camera on and give us a wave. From Charles Darwin University, a 2024 AAUT citation recipient. Kat is of Aboriginal and Celtic seafaring descent and is a senior lecturer in the Faculty of Science and Technology at Charles Darwin University. She works closely with Aboriginal communities on online language learning, story sharing, and data analysis, creating digital spaces where Aboriginal culture and knowledge are acknowledged, respected, and integrated into Australian engineering and technology education. And our third and final panellist is Professor Benjamin, also known as Benny Wilson. So, Benjamin, please put your camera on and wave also, from the University of Technology, Sydney. He's a recipient of the 2022 AAUT Neville Bonner Award for Indigenous Education Teaching Excellence. Benny is a Jagera man and a professor in Indigenous education at UTS. His work focuses on indigenising curriculum, embedding Indigenous ways of knowing across disciplines, and mentoring staff to engage in genuine, country-centred educational practice. He brings extensive experience as a teacher, coach, and academic leader. Thank you again for joining us, and my sincere thanks to the chair and the panelists for who will be generously sharing their time and expertise with us over the next hour or so. Before I hand over to Corinne, I just want to say that I have to apologise now that I have to leave early as I'm chairing the STEM College Learning and Teaching Strategy Committee. So I need some time to walk over to the face-to-face meeting and to get my papers all together. So I'll be leaving a little bit earlier, but I'm leaving you in the good hands of Angeline, who will be closing the session along with Manisha. So over to you, Corinne, and I'll let you start the panel discussion.
Mandanguru, Ange, and thank you for acknowledging country today. I am really excited to be chairing this session, and I think we'll just get right into it with a really simple question right up, and that is, in a university context, what does Indigenous knowledges in action really look like? And, how does this differ from including Indigenous content in a course? Is there anyone who would like to volunteer to go first? Otherwise, I'll volunteer you. Oh, no. All right, Jess, I reckon it's over to you.
Awesome. Yuridamarang Baladua Digiga Wiradjuri Wumble Yinna. Hi everyone, my name is Jess. I am a sovereign Wiradjuri Wumble woman from the Smith and McGuinness matriarchy, and I'm very grateful to be here today alongside our awesome panelists and chair. So thank you. And such a big question to open with, and one that is really important, right? And for me, this is really about the difference between Indigenous content is that it's often added as an addition or an and to existing curriculum, as opposed to Indigenous knowledges being about transformation, place, time, community, and nation. And I think what can happen in this space is people go, oh, I really want to do the right thing. I really want to include different knowledges. But what happens is it becomes content about us. It is often not contextualized. It is often not critically analyzed through assessment, through curriculum design, as opposed to actually really shifting and structurally changing curriculum. And for me, in the work that I always do, it's also about Indigenous knowledges isn't just this kind of collective term we put on things. It relates to the oldest living, surviving custodians educators, researchers of this land and the whole world, and there is a rich history and contemporary reality of survival that carries through in that. And when we start to put Indigenous curriculum in a pan-Indigenous lens, it starts to erase and further that genocide and dislocation of who we are. So for me as well, Indigenous knowledge has to be related to place, nation, and people.
Thanks, Jess. Kat, would you like to add your perspectives there?
Yeah, I see it again holistic within the university. As I mean, Jessica's involved in ethics, I was involved in ethics. It's you're not just looking at teaching, you're looking at how the researchers are treated, how our research participants are treated. We need to involve staff more. So it's how do we bring up our First Nations researchers into the academia? How do we give them work integrated learning in the environment to get used to it? But there's also a lot of structural barriers to getting First Nations staff. So I'm from Charles Darwin University. I'm actually Yugambeh, so way off country, but it's still it's disappointing. There's not many more staff to support each other in the process. So we need that the group, the network to support each other in the places where we can be open to talk and share. But also having students as partners. We encourage students who are able to speak about their knowledge, their culture, to work with the lecturers to embed it in a way that respects them and their understanding of the course. So it's sort of at the student level. And yeah, that's ways another part of bringing them into the academia. They're involved in the teaching. So it's my bit.
Thanks. And Benny, would you like to add anything here?
Yeah, look, thank you so much for having me. I'm deeply humbled to be on this panel with some really deadly educators who I've known and respected for some time. Yeah, particularly Professor Sullivan, to be honest with you. So thank you. Look, what we're talking about here is knowledge that stretches back at least 60,000 years. I don't think we think about that often enough. This is the legacy of education in this country. Education has been taking place here for at least 60,000 years ongoing. So it can't be the lip service that we see, as you point out, when we just add Indigenous content at the end of the course. If we're talking about, an English course, we think, oh God, we've got to tick that box where we Indigenize the curriculum. Let's throw in a poem by Udru Nunuckle. And we think that that's sufficient. Where I come from in this and what Indigenous knowledge in action looks like has to come with non-Indigenous humility in understanding that the reason we should do this, the reason that we should embed Indigenous knowledge deeply in all our education programs is not to be politically correct, is not because it's the right thing to do, even though it absolutely is. It's because Indigenous knowledge has value and utility, and it always has. For thousands and thousands of years, our people created the most sustainable society the world has ever seen. Ages, orders of magnitude older than the pyramids, which is generally in Australia what we turn to when we want to talk about ancient history. Go to the pyramids. And if we're going to do that, if we understand that our ways of being are based in these really old ways, then we need to understand that perhaps for a society struggling with questions of sustainability, we should turn to the wisdom of the people who created the most sustainable society on the planet. For me, it's as simple as that, but it means that it deserves more than current approaches, which simply add Indigenous content at the end. And in a way, to be totally honest with you, it deserves more than simply thinking that the reason we do this is because we want to rush more Indigenous people into the tertiary space. We need more Indigenous people in the tertiary space. Of course, we want more Indigenous students. However, for me, that's a separate argument to saying, why do we need Indigenous knowledge? Not just so we can satiate the blackfellas who are coming in. It's because that knowledge is going to help the non-Indigenous people coming in. It's because it has value. So for me, embedding Indigenous knowledge, and I realize we're probably going to go on to this, embedding Indigenous knowledge has to come from a core of knowing, understanding, and caring for place, which is what built the most sustainable society, which is what we're hoping to see in universities moving forward.
Thanks, everyone. I think this has really given us a great, rich context in which to launch right through this discussion today. I think I might pick up from where Benny's left us there, and that's, what what we can do in those really in practical terms, in including everyone into this work, Indigenous, non-Indigenous, our students, but doing so from that is place-based, that's Indigenous-led, that's country-informed. What does that respectful engagement require and needed to be done with Indigenous communities, with individuals, elders, knowledge holders, and country involve? Seeing as I left you, Benny, I might start back with you though.
Oh, everyone's sick of my voice here, Corinne, but no, okay. I'll jump in. No, look, it's a really good question. I think I come from a slightly controversial place here. My knowledge and my learning, which is, and I want to acknowledge my teachers who taught me on Darkinjung Young country in the Central Coast and Garrigili country out in Brewarrina, my grandfathers and uncles out there. They taught me a fundamental truth, which has become a basis of my teaching, I suppose. And that is that through the water in our bodies and the dirt in our bodies, we are all country. So when Big Bill Nietzsche stood up in Kakadu in the 1970s and said, "I'm country and country is me," everyone thought he was being metaphorical, but he wasn't. He was being absolutely literal. Now, here's the controversial part. Big Bill didn't point at all the black fellas and say, "I am country and they are country, and you white fellas, I don't know what you are," because it wasn't true. It wasn't true then, it isn't true now. Now, this does not mean that as a non-Indigenous person, you understand the struggle of being an Indigenous person, and you can never understand that, and you shouldn't try to. But the Indigenous system of knowing, whereby we are all country, and therefore we all have a fundamental obligation to know, understand, and care for it, is a profoundly Indigenous point of view, but it's not an exclusively Indigenous point of view. So for me, where we start is by pointing this out to our non-Indigenous colleagues. We very clearly say, this is everyone's business. This isn't a black-white thing. This is about bringing everyone on board by saying, you need to understand, know, and care for country, just like our people did for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. Without pointing too fine a point on it, the current education system we have, which I acknowledge I'm a beneficiary of, and the panelists I'm sure would acknowledge are a beneficiary of as well. Well, let's be frank, men and women, but primarily men, who did really well in this education system, who became captains of industry and got A's and B's all through school and PhDs, they're the people who brought the world to the brink of ecological, environmental, and social collapse. So we need to do something different. We need to be changing this world. We need to be changing the education system. So for me, that's what we mean when we're talking about meaningfully embedding things. But I'm going to stop talking now because I'm going on and open it up.
Thanks, Betty. We love your conversation. Kat, maybe I'll throw it to you now.
Yeah, a lot of my work has been in developing a safe space for students, and because we've got a lot of international students, it, as Benny says, it's not just for First Nations, it's broader. This open door, much more flexible in teaching and learning. But also I work with like a levels program. I hope you can't hear the background, but anyway, we'll see. The program that's based on being, knowing, doing in that order, because we didn't want to start with the massacres, which are quite prevalent around the NT and those issues, but we start with how do we see ourselves, who are we as First Nations, and our knowledge systems, how we share that knowledge and get people informed of who they're working with. And then we go into the knowing, like how do you know to work with us? What knowledge do we share? What projects can we share? And then into the doing, we actually do the project. So we sort of stage it to get people familiar with developing the relationships and not just expect they can go in, but also try and encourage non-First Nations staff to talk up and make mistakes. And I call them compatriots because they're living in our country and they need to learn how to live in our country sustainably, as Benny said. And so how they can be compatriots. And my approach is that I want to indoctrinate all Australians into our culture so that we have a good, sustainable culture, and that it's shared in a way that people can, understand that it's they build the concepts themselves from what they come from, which often they come from oral cultures, communal cultures, and they can come in and start to understand our culture and respect it. Thank you.
Wonderful. Jess, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts.
Thanks, everyone. Yeah, and just as I'm listening to the discussions too, a kind of question that pops up for me is is this really about meaningfully embedding Indigenous knowledges? Because we're already here. The land has not gone anywhere. We have survived, we have sustained, we are here. I don't need to be embedded or put anywhere else. For me, the question is about transforming the colonial and the colonial legacies of higher education. And thinking about decolonial work, anti-colonial work, undoing the colony, resisting the colony, and all the ways that it occurs in education. And education is an institution that has and continues to carry colonial logics and powers, right? And I start to think about also what is not metaphorical is decolonial work, and Tuck and Yang, First Nations scholars, talk about that decolonizing and decolonizing as an action, as a continuing action, same as anti-colonial, anti-colonizing in the education space, is an ongoing piece of work that also relates back to country, returning those practices to country and relationships to country. Because what happens a lot in these spaces, and I've just seen so much in the work, is Indigenous knowledges. One of my dear aunties said this to me probably about 7 years ago. She just summarized it really well. Auntie Professor Sue Green said, when Indigenous knowledges are taken out of context, they're colonized and made into content. So when we start to put in Indigenous knowledges, what do we actually mean by that? And sometimes people are using that term when actually what they don't want to say is the curriculum is racist, the curriculum is oppressive, and the work is to transform that. Indigenous knowledges and those in action and honouring those sovereign ways has to come alongside an understanding of the systems and the power that education sits within the sustaining element of that system of oppression and colonial violence. We've just got the Racism at Uni final report, the Uni Accord. We've had the Berendt Review. We've had Uncle Prof. Rigney's review. There's been so many, but it's just not changing enough. And the cost of this is serious. It's lives, it's country, it's quality of life, it's sense, and not just for us, as the others have said, for everybody. And it's a shared responsibility there. But that to me is about, you can't just come and take our knowledge and put it where you want, because A, colonizing, B, assimilating, C, goes against local country protocol, total violation. But importantly, you first have to transform the colonial and be deep in that work as a continuance of work and action. And this is where accountability and transparency are really important. Even recent reviews, there was a Senate review into higher education. One of the key critiques of universities is the lack of transparency and accountability in governance and curriculum, right? Key findings. And there is this issue of kind of, I want to look like I'm doing the right thing, but I don't want to actually name the problem. And if we keep avoiding it, nothing's going to happen. And in fact, it's such a covert, insidious way of reappropriating and appropriating our knowledges, but also keeping colonial legacies going, right? And just thinking about a practical example, one of the things that I've done with the social work team at ACU is develop a resource on tracking Indigenous cultural intellectual property that has been contributed to our curriculum. So most universities have an IP policy. General rule is what's produced for the uni is owned by the uni. However, every university has an ICIP clause in that, right? But often it's forgotten about, or it's not the first thing at the front of many people's minds. So we've been doing a lot of work on actualizing that into every practice of curriculum. But part of that is this resource where the unit lead and the course coordinators actually have to check that repeatedly and reseek that permission and advocate for appropriate payment to reuse that knowledge throughout. Because even when I'm here talking about education, this comes from who I am, Jeannie Smith's granddaughter, Eileen McGuinness's great-granddaughter, a little Koori kid who grew up on country and learnt from her grandma. Everything I say is always connected to my Indigenous cultural intellectual property, yeah? So this is something that non-Indigenous colleagues can also be doing, is looking at how you can use the policy that is there also to ensure and enforce the right thing is happening. And ICIP is just one example that I think is a great way to do that.
That's a really great point about the ICIP and ways that we can actually meaningfully work together. And I think everyone on the panel today has really identified that this isn't a job that we do alone, and that we need to do it in partnership with Indigenous peoples, with communities, with elders, with country. But we also need to do it with each other. And I'm not talking about Indigenous people, I'm talking about Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. So they do have a responsibility to work in this space. And are you able to share any constructive examples of where non-Indigenous academics have come on this journey or produced this kind of work that you could share? Maybe I'll start with you, Kat.
It's appropriate. I'm actually at ANU, Narrabri Country. It's the Bundalung studio backdrop. It's an engineering studio at ANU where we come together to discuss projects and share knowledge amongst engineers and people from other disciplines. And so it's provided the idea, the safe space area where we can work together. And I think that's really important for us to, well, partly there's a question, decolonise. If we're going to be removing what's already there that's not appropriate, that's not supportive, like particularly in promotions, it's quite hard for women Aboriginal people, even more so than male Aboriginal people, to get promotion at the university here. I've been talking to colleagues who are very frustrated with the system of promotion, and therefore acceptance of our knowledge is value. And that if we can have more support for each other in that environment, and to share our knowledge and increase it, it's helping us improve the curriculum. But also we're coming in with, this is what we want taught. It's not, here's your content, here's your context, but creating our new approaches and new ways to look at it. So, I mean, that's the sort of approach we're taking here, and I'm really enjoying it. So that's why I come down here twice a year.
Benny, I might pass to you.
Well, I'm just thrilled that, Kat, that you can be a woman and I'm Jagger from Brizzy, and then on Ngunnawal country where I live, even though I'm over here at UTS at the moment. So look at all those connections just flying up everywhere. But look, I hear you 100%. What you're saying. It's exciting when our non-Indigenous colleagues want to get involved in stuff like this. And I think that part of the struggle at the moment is making sure that people are inspired and fired up to do this. And the way that it's worked for me is with the understanding is consistently pointing out that this is everybody's business and that they can embrace this way, and that really when it comes to education, which is my field and where I've worked for 25 years or something, that when it comes to education, our ways of knowing can really help everyone sort of just it helps them remember why they became educators in the first place. There's a lot of disaffectation in education at the moment because it's consistently being held down as something that is just, anyone can do it. The robots and direct instruction mean that we can all just educate. We can just send anyone without any degree at all out there because, those who can't do teach, and we all sort of chortle heartily at that. And yet the reality is that, the work that I've been doing with country as teacher, the reports that we get back through the research that we've been doing have teachers saying, this wasn't what we thought we were doing when we talked about indigenizing the curriculum. But this is us remembering what true teaching is supposed to be about. I'm just humbled that I can be part of that. That it's something that my old people have told me is the case, and we're just seeing it carried forward here. So to answer the question directly, what's a specific example? The work that we did at UC, the University of Canberra, and that we're continuing forward at UTS in the country as teacher space, where we're inviting non-Indigenous people to have these experiences and embed their personal experiences of being with country in their lesson planning, in their unit planning, and in their curriculum. We're seeing a lot of success in that place. And to be honest, as Jess pointed out earlier, I'd go into bat for people like that every day of the week and say they are doing a really good thing in indigenizing their practice over the person who, throws in a boomerang throwing lesson at the end of something or teaches one of our Indigenous games and says that their PE class is now indigenized. It's just a far more meaningful way to do things, but it's about firing people up and getting them excited, I think.
Jess.
Yeah, great points. Thank you, Kat and Benny. And yeah, I so agree with it. It's an energy. It's in the fight and in the struggle, right? That shared fight for liberation. And I think not a solely curriculum explicit example, but a being and a doing within the education space or any space, for me, is a really practical thing to do is openly and publicly own when you've made a mistake and model that for others. Because again, there becomes this move to innocence if someone's done something wrong. Oh, I didn't mean that. That wasn't my intention. It's 2026. We hear about the impact, right, that it's having on the world and community. But when we don't call out that approach, it becomes re-embedded and there is this avoidance of the problem, right, and owning it. And the use of self, whether that's in a team meeting, in front of a classroom, when someone has made a mistake and owns it and models it, is so significant. I've actually seen students probably do this more than any educator I have ever met in my, 12 years maybe in higher ed and across about 3 universities. I've seen my students come into class the following week and in front of the class note, I said this last week. That was actually really racialized and problematic. I own that. I'm going to do better. Yet in the staff space, I never see that. Or when there is an attempt toward that, there is such a resistance of engaging in it. And, I've seen this when I've done curriculum review reports. I'm always told to make it sound more positive. Now, if anyone is trying to make racism more positive, there's a significant issue there, right? Which is so blatant, but wild how often it comes up. And if we don't start to disrupt those norms, and I think what that kind of storing of make it more positive, or, it's all about this idea that we can't be inspired or fired up without naming and realizing and sitting in the problem, is such a colonial way of doing things, right? It's an erasure of the reality of the experience. And really, if you look at, what blackfellas have been saying forever, but the Racism at Uni report makes it very loud and clear that racism is here. And the way that it has transformed from less kind of overt to more covert ways of racism, institutionally, systemically, but also interpersonally, is such a challenge. And so it's also on everybody to identify where those systems of racism and colonialism happen, to call it out, and then to also own when they've made a mistake, because that's so powerful. And, growing up, if, if I was naughty, which did happen a little bit when I was a little Korean kid. But, my nan wouldn't go, oh, let's have a meeting about that later, Jess, and take me to a different end of the house. No, in that moment, she would say, hey, what are you doing, Jessie? We don't do that. That's naughty. Or that was rude. Make sure you apologize, right? Why don't we do that as adults anymore? But we think it's okay to do it to children and not each other. That's quite infantilizing. But yeah, it's about owning behavior and being willing to change it.
Kat.
And more because, it ties in a lot. I go from the education side where, like, we were taught at school, when we're taught in culture, we're taught by listening and learning and until we understand, and not questioning, not continual questioning. But you go to school and the Western method is Socratic. Now, how do you spell cat? And most of my colleagues can't. They do it with a K. So you do it wrong and you're told, oh, you're wrong. And you try again. Oh, you're wrong. You keep told you're wrong until, oh, you're right. So there's you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong is repeated. Well, come on. When people come to work with us in our culture, we'll tell them they're wrong. And we're told that's the way you teach. So we assume that's the way you learn. And we will teach that way. And we'll get really angry because it's upset us. So we'll express that. So it's really upset us. But you'll find if you go the next day and say, oh, look, I'm really sorry about what I did. Not just acknowledge it, but if you go to apologize and expect, people go, what are you talking about? Like, that was yesterday. Now you know. Now you can do it. You are a resource. You're valuable. You've made that mistake. And if you've acknowledged it, that's better, because then you're not trying to fight the thing that happened. You're just saying, yes, it happened. Then you will become a resource for us. So please, please make mistakes and let us tell you that you've made mistakes so that you become better. Because all this fluffing around and not doing anything because we might make a mistake is not helping us. And also, stop pulling your peers down. The people my colleagues who have most been hurt in their attempt to work with communities have been non-Aboriginal people harassed by non-Aboriginal people saying, oh, you had no right to do that. How do they know? Who's their mob? How do they know? So yes, it's a really frustrating area.
Yeah. Oh, sorry,
Sorry.
Corinne. Oh no, I was just going to make a point that you kind of nailed it. What I was about to say, Kat, I think, and for me, it's around non-Indigenous fragility in this space, and it's difficult because let's face the facts. The four of us sitting here on this panel are rare as hen's teeth. We're Indigenous academics. Indigenous teachers are still very rare. We make up 3.8% of the population holistically. Fewer of us go into education and become teachers, even fewer become academics. But the issue that we have is that if it's all on us to do this teaching, then we're in a lot of trouble. If we're the only ones who can teach this way, then we're in a lot of trouble. So we need allies to come along with us. Absolutely. But the issue that I see, and I'm sure that my colleagues on the panel have seen as well, is when someone gets something a little bit wrong and they do get hit with the respect stick. And I can tell from the stories that Jess and Kat have shared, we've been all hit with the respect stick by our aunties in particular, but sometimes our uncles, over the years. And if you get hit with the respect stick and your response to that is, I'm never going to touch Indigenous things again, I've learned my lesson, you're not helping us. You're cutting yourself off from further learning. So you've got to be more robust than to get that kind of feedback and think, well, I'm never going to do this again because I might hurt someone. Have a go again. Keep working with us. And as Kat said so beautifully, that was yesterday. Now it's today. Let's concentrate on what we're doing now. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Betty. I'm going to be a poor chair and interject my own personal opinions here, or educated ones. It strikes me as highly ironic that our colleagues who are educators, learners, researchers, and have the ability to hear or synthesize and then disseminate information and knowledge struggle to do their job. You are literally trained to find information, to synthesize information, to hold conversation with competing ideas, dialogues, and discourses. And yet here is where we see a huge juncture. And deeper than that is not only the irony here, but then we have what actually is so many policy enablers in institutions to do this work. We have things like the ICIPs, we have university strategies, usually Indigenous strategy, we'll have a reconciliation action plan, we'll have all these instruments that provide the space to do the work, and yet people won't step in. And the only big word I feel like we haven't said today, but we've danced around it, is power. And the power differentials and the power somehow to choose whether or not people do this work. And I think what would be useful maybe is to have that conversation about because the structures actually enable the work too at universities. So where is our problem here? Jess, I might throw to you.
Yes, great. And 100% agree, Corinne. And I always, I know in my Indigenous Research Ethics Advisory Panel chair, get that a lot. People are putting in their applications and we're making comments around Indigenous methodologies or critical understandings of research. And then I get an email back asking basically for an annotated bibliography. And it's like, dude, you've got a PhD. You more than have the skill set for this. And the double standard there, because if I ever asked a non-Indigenous colleague to do my work for me in that way, the criticism and violence I would face, like that double standard is so real and so lived. And you know what you said as well, Corinne, you know, it's our job. We actually, as you said, there are policy enablers here, right? How many people actually don't know their learning and teaching policies and procedures at their universities, right? I was definitely guilty of that before I had some time in an academic developer role. And then I had to become really savvy across all of those policies and procedures because that's what I used as an armor or as a weapon in certain spaces. And then you build those relationships through the policy, through the procedures, because universities, you know, they're accredited, they're regulated to a degree. But when we make those arguments as well, it's about, you know, everyone is going to benefit when we enact this or live this. You know, I've seen recent changes supported at ACU in changing our learning and teaching procedures, our assessment procedures, all those sorts of things for when staff are like, oh, I can't do that, or could I do that? It literally says right here. One of the other kind of pieces of legislation and policy that is a bit of a sticky one for me is even in TEXA, in all our regulation documentation in the Act, there's a clause around universities need to provide policies and procedures that are sensitive to Indigenous cultures. And I find that use really interesting, right? And linking back to the point on fragility, I think we need to reassign that or shift that lens on whose sensitivity is actually being catered for here. There was a comment in the chat before around non-Indigenous fragility. And that, yes, academics have certain skill sets, but they haven't learned to self-regulate. I actually argue the opposite. Those moves to innocence, that resistance to not doing the work, being the victim when you've harmed an Indigenous person or knowledge, is actually the exact regulation that the colony wants you to do, right? To maintain that power norm. So they have learned how to do it, but for who and for what supremacy or for what power is different, right? And for me, a big question I ask in this space is why do you want to do this? You know, yeah, there might be an accreditation or policy point, but, you know, if at the end of doing a project, it's to put your name next to an Indigenous person who's probably statistically not the first author, even though they did most of the work, and you whack it in your promotion application, but you're not leading to systemic change within your team, your unit, your school, whatever that structure looks like, that's not doing the work. And that's not the why that's needed when we're looking at injustice in education.
Thanks, Jess. Kat.
Yeah, I'd like to come for the example from, I'm from CDU and I work at ANU. We both lost our VC recently. Now we're coming to the university to offer quite a different perspective on knowledges, on basically everything, particularly on governance. Why is there not more consultation in the university? If a university department is going to make a decision, why don't they consult the staff? And as we build up more First Nations staff, that will include what we need, what should be embedded, what should be decolonized, and that consultation can happen. But this is the governance structure we had for thousands of years in Australia. Why is that not respected? Now we've got these, as you're saying, we've got these rules, these regulations that people brought in that it's supposed to be saying we should feel the right way or we should maybe do the right thing. But to actually do it, you've got to sit and listen. You've got to realize that we're bringing in a totally new perspective, a totally new way of doing things. Listen to it. This could change the world for everyone. As Benny said, it's not just for us. But we really need to listen to change. Yeah.
Thanks. Benny.
There's a point there. I'm just going to make a brief point here, and I know that it's how my panelists feel, despite the fact that I don't work closely with any of you. We're here to be Indigenous academics. We're not here to be white academics with Indigenous skin or Indigenous features. So we're not here to learn your ways, all right? Or maybe to lessen that to a certain extent. As Jess so beautifully put, you've got to learn the tools of the colonizer in order to take it up against colonization. Like you've got to learn these processes. But we're not here to forget who we are in this space. And too often I feel like there is Jess keeps talking about this problem, And the biggest problem that I see is that the inherent assumption from within institutions, education institutions like schools and universities, that when Indigenous people come here, we should be so grateful that we're allowed to set foot on the educational mountain because we're held out of it for so long. That's not what we're about. You know, there was a great analogy that was used a while ago about, you know, initially when it was about the education mountain, we weren't even allowed to set foot on it. But now they put us in the back seat and drive us up the mountain, and we're supposed to be really grateful. And yet they're driving us off cliffs. They're driving us into dead ends. Why don't you throw us the car keys? Let us be who we are, and maybe we'll take you to a better place on that mountain. That's the point that we're, you know, that I think, you know, inspires me, that makes me do the work that I want to do.
Yes, give us the car keys. I'm full of time here at the moment, and what I want to absolutely believe is that the reason why everyone has joined, and so many people have joined this in to listen to on this discussion today, is because they either are already doing the work or are eager to do the work. And I take great comfort that there are people willing to either hand over the keys or sit in the passenger seat with us, hopefully maybe while we drive. Or when we're getting in a crash together. And I'm going off with my analogies and metaphors now. So I think because people do want to do this work, like the people who must want to or are doing it, what are some practical suggestions we can give for people to take away from this session with them? Jess, I'll throw to you first, if that's okay.
Yeah, awesome. And great closing question. You know, I think too, when we you know, and people always, you know, I want to be an ally, I want to be an ally, but this idea of ally becomes an identity, not a practice. It's not an identity. You can't call yourself an ally, right? The community will identify who is an ally, or rather who is an accomplice, which is a language that I prefer. You know, part of it is, you know, on top of reading Indigenous academics' work online, there's so much online on LinkedIn, on Instagram, everywhere. Indigenous knowledge holders share so much. Engage with that, you know. Do a systematic literature review or whatever you've learned from your PhD, you know, to really build that knowledge. But alongside that, learn how, and I say this from experience because, you know, a lot of people want gold stars around this work. This work is not about gold stars. And when you come in with that focus and about you, that's a problem. And a lot of harm follows that. You know, and when I kind of share that critique, some people go, oh, that's a bit negative. Like, I don't know what to take from that. That's actually part of naming the problem and the reality of the problem, right? And so part of that is, if academics are coming into this space and they don't know who they are, they don't identify themselves, they don't position themselves, not just in relation to that knowledge, but to place, to the country that they are on, to the people around them, a lot of harm continues to happen. So you've really got to know yourself, and you've got to do the work and be committed to the work. One thing I always do when I run trainings in clinical settings for health and social workers and allied health workers is start with a question on what's your appetite for feedback and being called out, right? Because I'm also not going to waste my time and expose myself to harm if it's not moving anywhere. So that sense of self in an individual sense, but also a team, a discipline, you know, a profession, whatever that looks like, is really important. And to also always be grounded in understandings that Indigenous knowledges are not yours to take, nor own, nor extract, that there is a relationship to knowledge that is so important, and a respect for knowledge. And this is where I really connect with Wiradjuri cosmology, because for us, all knowledge in the world exists. It finds us when we are ready to know it. So some people come into this space and they want all the answers and they want a pretty checklist. That's often a sign that someone hasn't done the work to be ready for that knowledge to find them. So you've got to do the work first.
Great. Thanks, Jess. Kat?
Yeah, it'll find you, not you. Yeah, I've got friends who sort of want to know something, and I realize just wait, it'll come. But also, if you're higher up in academia, you've got power to make control changes. And just an example, we had we've got embedding committee, and we've got work integrated learning as a priority. So we got associate deans of work integrated learning. So I said, well, could we have associate deans of embedding, because no one's doing it. We can't seem to enforce it. No, it's not considered. We need the resources. Please, if you're in any authority position, give us the resources. That means more people who are already prepared, as Jessica said, already aware of the space and involved in the space and can actually work with us. But also this issue of, I'm very much an engineer doing, so if you want to understand and work with Aboriginal people, go out and go to events like NAIDOC, go to activities, get to know people, get to understand the approach that people have to life, let alone academia. And you might have some skills that you can contribute, and that two-way or both-way learning process where you contribute some skill, you'll learn the fun and games it is to work with community, the jokes, the endless teasing, the enjoyment of life that can come out of these partnerships is really worth it. And then you start to understand that this is not an imposition on you. This is for your benefit. As Benny said, it's benefit for everyone. So please, join with us in explaining the system. There's things that we haven't had from our childhood. So please explain how the system works, what we need to do, anything that would help us, and we can explain how you can join our system. So share the knowledge. Yeah.
Thanks, Kat. Ben?
Yeah, look, this might be where I differ a little bit from my colleagues on the panel, and that is not to say to deny the wonderful and important work that Kat and Jess and Corinne are all doing. But for me, the practical takeaway that I want people to do is to get away from this idea of human-centric ideology. We talk about acknowledgements of country, and then we spend all our time acknowledging people, the traditional owners of this land, the Wiradjuri people, and their elders, past, present, and emerging. It's about country, and it always was about country. And perhaps the key to living a sustainable life is to stop putting human beings at the center of everything we do. And I have to say, for me, that includes where we're going or where we've been with Indigenous knowledge, within Indigenous academia. The people are important, and we should acknowledge that people are important, but country should be at the center. So what I'd ask people to do practically is get outside. Yeah, go and sit in places that are important to you, and stop seeing the world, this beautiful planet that we live on, as the pretty little backdrop to the unfolding drama of human existence. In fact, I use the wrong word there, because when I say this beautiful planet or this beautiful country, if I have a relationship with a woman or a man, and the most significant thing that I can say about them is that they're beautiful, there's probably something pretty broken in my relationship with that woman or man. And that country is strong. Country is nourishing. Country is important. Country is sacred. But the way that we change things is by getting out into country and spending time there and learning that lesson that our ancestors learned and reinforcing our children for thousands and thousands of years, and built, in a lot of ways, what was a utopic society. So if I leave you with one thing to do, go and do that. Spend half an hour a week sitting in a place that's significant to you and start learning the patterns of country.
Thanks, Benny. My grandma always said to me when I would ask things, she would say, Corinne, the answer is in the question. So you need to go sit with your question. I don't know if she was trying to tell me to get away, but I think sitting on country to find that answer is when and how it comes to you. And it does come to you when there's patience and humility and some grace being shown to country and self and everyone. I think we should have a look to see if there are any questions in the chat that we might want to tackle. And I can see here that there's one around, what are our perspectives on the proliferation of AI in education, and what's that impact for around knowledge and ownership? Thoughts, panel?
We have been fairly careful not to share our knowledge openly on the web. So the first time I looked up for the UML for yes, I got yucca, which is no. Second time I got, I'm just an AI bot, I don't know much. That was really good. The third time it started to know. So there is knowledge being shared, but often it's not full knowledge. There's very little knowledge on the web. But we can share it within groups. So it becomes localizing AI. So we have models at CDU that are within the CDU servers. They're not shared outside that language group. Things like this, or it could be storytelling on country. we've got personal online data storage where that knowledge is shared only in that thing. It's not available open, but then people can decide how they combine that knowledge, how they present it publicly, and that will be shared publicly. So using the AI tools to allow people to improve their ability to express their knowledge and share their knowledge, but maintaining that control of it. But also we're using it for our First Nations students. Write a scientific report on your environmental management as a ranger, or your team report. You can say it, speak it to the AI tool, it can write it, and you can get something that's in the format that people want to read that expresses your ideas and views. So there's sort of different balances.
Any other thoughts on this?
Yeah, I was just going to add, this is, and I've written back to the comment in the chat. This is a big area of my research, and myself and Prof. Michelle Lazarus from Monash University co-wrote a book called The AI Revolution: Valuing Country, Culture and Community in a World of Algorithms. And it's the whole book and the whole text is grounded in a Wiradjuri understanding of technology and AI. And again, I think AI can become a very, I don't know, easy excuse for some people to use, right? There are people behind the digital curtain, and to always blame the machine is a problem. And if you are applying Indigenous knowledges, AI is a being and in relationship to us. It comes from country. There's some really interesting work too. I think, there are some awful examples of AI being used to harm community. There's also some incredible pieces of work of Indigenous invention, innovation coming through across the world around language reclamation using AI, depending on how you define it. But I think too, it can be this kind of dark, gloomy cloud that we like to throw all the nose at, but there's something in it. And a Wiradjuri understanding of AI comes from the concept of Wayana, which means transformation, that nothing ever ceases to exist or starts to exist, rather it transforms in its expression. So AI is an expression of technology, and technology is not neutral. It can be used in many ways, and AI is a part of that.
Thanks, Jess. And maybe I should have set some AI to tell me when to stop us all talking, because I just note the time. I want to thank the panelists today for sharing your, really rich and fruitful thoughts, perspectives and knowledges with everyone here online, and for those that will listen again later. I thank you. I feel like we sit in company all the time, and together we just make these spaces better. And I wish that actually that was the thing that I wish our non-Indigenous colleagues learnt the most, is actually when we do it together, it is better. On that note, and hopefully with some optimism, I will hand back to our organisers here, Angeline.
Yeah, thanks, Corinne, Jessica, Kit, and Benny. Let's give them a virtual clap. Thank you so much. Really appreciate your time, panelists, and every one of you who joined us today. This is to let you know that this session has been recorded, and we will be sharing the recording on HRSA and AAUTM websites. And those who have subscribed to our newsletters, we will send a link via the newsletters as well. So on behalf of the organizers, thank you again for your time and participations. This is only the beginning of the HRSA AAUT national webinars. Our next sessions is actually on the 30th of April, and we'll be sending out more information. And for the rest of you, if you have further questions or feedback, email to AAUT or HRSA, and we can get in touch with the panelists if needed, and we will get back to you. All right, thank you everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day. All right, thanks, bye.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, everyone.